Good morning, you guys. It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Don't miss basketball conversations every Friday night, which includes tonight, 9 p.m. Central Time, is where we discuss basketball-related topics, news, debates, and everything else in the world of basketball. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to get all the latest notifications when I drop some videos and live stream. And starting from this video, I will also post the links on my Cash App and PayPal links underneath the description box. If you want to donate any money to the value of this channel so I can help improve the content, it's risk free. You can do it whatever you feel like it. So I'm gonna leave it down there up to you. So with all the pleasantries out the way, let's get down to business, shall we? Well, this is another historical perspective video, but it's not going to be about a particular player or about a team this time. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite conference finals series, in the last decade. And I'm talking about the 2002 Western Conference Finals between the Sacramento Kings versus the Los Angeles Lakers. I was around, I think I was 8 or 9 years old in 2002 of that series. And I will tell you that it is one of the most memorable 7 game series I've ever watched. From both these teams, they're both from California. The Lakers have been historically the most consistent franchise with all the championships hanging around in Staples Center. And then the Sacramento Kings finally putting the pieces together to become a championship contending team. The other thing too is that this was the third time that both the Sacramento Kings and the Los Angeles Lakers have met in the playoffs. The first time in 2001, the Lakers were a 1 seed and the Kings were an A seed. The Kings were not at that championship level yet, but they made things very interesting. They pushed it to a 5 game series until the Lakers blew them out in Game 5. Then in 2001, the Kings made big strides during that year, and they went on to win and finish third in the West and went up against the Lakers again in round 2. But unfortunately, it was right off of the heels of that historical run by the LA Lakers when they went 15-1 in that entire postseason and ended up getting swept in 4 games. But 2 of those games, Game 1 and Game 4, were pretty much competitive. But it took every bit of dominant performances of Shaquille O'Neal in the first 2 games, and then Kobe Bryant in games 3 and 4, which also featured a Game 4 when Kobe scored 48 points and grabbed 16 rebounds. And then the next series, Game 1 against the Spurs in that conference final, Kobe dropped 45 points and grabbed 10 rebounds. Dominant, and also rest in peace, Kobe Bryant. But the seeds of that rivalry was planted back in 2000. Because the Kings historically have been the laughingstock along with the Clippers in the NBA, but they put a squad together. They traded for Vlade Divac in '99. They traded their all-star Mitch Richmond to Washington for Chris Webber. Then they drafted Jason Williams, drafted Peja Stojakovic, and all of them in the course of 1 year, they made the playoffs and nearly upset the Utah Jazz in that 5 game series in '99. But by that time, the Kings were slowly making themselves a contender. But it wasn't until this offseason in 2001 when they made the biggest splashes of the offseason. The offseason 2000, they traded Corliss Williamson to the Raptors for Doug Christie. And then after that, in the next offseason, they pulled off a bigger trade, trading Jason Williams to the Grizzlies, who were going to be moving to Memphis for Mike Bibby. Now, Mike Bibby at that time was one of the top 5, top 10 point guards in the NBA, but was playing on a losing team for so many years. And although Jason Williams was pretty much an exciting point guard to play with, his turnover, his turnover tendencies and his ability to always on the highlight reels was not going to get them over the top. So they chose a most stable point guard in Mike Bibby, who turned out to be a great trade because he provided stability in the point guard position, but also he provided them with excellent shooting off that point guard position that desperately was needed. Then you add that with Doug Christie being one of the best defenders at that time, okay? And then you add that with Peja Stojakovic, and then you got the 2-headed monster of Chris Webber and Vlade Divac, Bobby Jackson off the bench, Hedo Turkoglu off the bench, and Scott Pollard off the bench. They were a team to be reckoned with. And that year, the Lakers kind of regressed a bit because they let Horace Grant go to Orlando, and they got Lindsey Hunter. They got an old Mitch Richmond who was on his final season in the NBA, and Samaki Walker. So they didn't have much of a deep bench. You know what I mean? And they only managed maybe 52 victories during that entire year. But the Sacramento Kings had one of their best seasons in in their franchise's history. That year, the Sacramento Kings finished with 61 regular season victories. One of the best regular season turnarounds that you ever had. You know what I mean? And a little correction there. It was actually at 58 regular season victories for the Lakers. Little correction. But that team was, many people saw that team was the one team that had the best chance of beating the LA Lakers. The Spurs were still in the mix, but they weren't at their championship peak once again because they brought in new pieces of Bruce Bowen, Tony Parker, you know what I mean, and Steven Jackson. They were bringing in new pieces, and even though they were still a championship contending team, they were bringing new pieces in, so they weren't ready for that crew yet. But that Sacramento team was the one team that many people felt that team had a great chance of beating that Lakers team because they were basically multi-talented. They played a much more of a disciplined type of offense, and they didn't have to worry about scoring a lot of points because they restructured their defense and actually became a better defensive team that year. Now, heading into that Western Conference Finals, it was the most anticipated Western Conference Finals of that year because the Kings finished third in the NBA in offensive efficiency and also sixth in the NBA in defensive rating. And so that year, the Kings were pretty much the one team that had the greatest chance of beating the LA Lakers in that 7-game series. But what we did not know was how beautiful and how great that series was, which also features some controversy, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But yeah, I remember the first 2 games. They were pretty much nail biters. Kobe Bryant, did what normally Kobe Bryant did do. Game 1 in that series, as I pull up the stats here real quick, they won 106-99. Kobe Bryant scored 30 points, dished out 5 assists, grabbed 6 boards, and pretty much was shooting 46% from the field. Shaquille O'Neal, it was also during that time, Shaquille O'Neal was dealing with multiple injuries to his ankles and to his fingers. He was not at 100%, but he was still bringing it. He scored 26 in that game, and for that set the tone of that series. Then the Kings came back, tied the series up at a game apiece. But then in the days off in between games 2 and 3, Kobe Bryant ended up getting sick. He ended up having a stomach virus, I think, and lost 8 to 9 pounds during that period of time, and was pretty much a bit weak, as noticeably I saw. So at the series shifted to Los Angeles, the Kings just blitzed the Lakers off the bat. They basically outscored the Lakers 32-15 in the first quarter of play, and at one point they were up 70-46 in the midway through the third quarter. So they were just pretty much embarrassing the Lakers at that time. But midway through that fourth quarter, the Kings let their guard down a bit and nearly let the Lakers get back into the game. Kobe Bryant during that fourth quarter, he pretty much was on a one-man mission at that time, scoring 16 points in that fourth quarter of play, and also hitting 4 threes to nearly bring the Lakers back into it. But even though the Kings won that game, that was the story plot that was going to set up to that unforgettable game in Game 4. And what happened at that game was probably one of the greatest games you'll ever find in the NBA. In fact, I'll be honest with you. That weekend and during that Memorial Day weekend in 2002 might have been the greatest, weekend of basketball I've ever seen, because the day before that Game 4 between the Kings and the Lakers, the Celtics and the Nets were playing against each other, and the Nets were up by as many as 20 points heading into the fourth quarter until the Celtics pulled off one of the greatest fourth quarter comebacks in NBA playoff history, coming back from 20 down to beat the Nets 94-90 to pretty much give them a 2-1 lead. And many people thought that the Celtics may pull through of that series. But I just wanted to illustrate that little point, because that was just an unbelievable game and an unbelievable comeback. But heading into that Game 4, the Kings were try to put the hammerlock on the series and go up 3-1 against the defending champions. And they knew if they had a 3-1 lead, it was going to be insurmountable to overcome. There's been a lot of other teams in NBA history that came back from a 3-1 deficit in earlier rounds of the playoffs, but not in the conference final. So the Kings, off the bat, blitzed them by 20. They were up 40-20. They was going to at least score at least 70 points in the first half. And they were pretty much dominating all four cylinders of that first half of play until the Lakers adjusted. Okay. And it started from that end of the first half when Samaki Walker hit that three to basically give them the boost heading into the locker room. But when you look at that replay, looking back, the Samaki Walker still had the ball in his hands as the clock expired, and that shot should not have counted. But instant replay didn't exist until the next year, and pretty much the shot stood. And so heading into the locker room, the Lakers knew that they had to control Mike Bibby because he was torturing them. In the first half of that game 4, Mike Bibby had 18 points. He was 8 of 11 from the field and was pretty much owning the Laker backcourt. Okay. And in that second half of play, in the second half, the Lakers did a better job of pressing on Mike Bibby, trapping him, and making sure he didn't get a clean look. And he only scored 3 points in that second half. So pretty much they did a good job of controlling Mike Bibby and not letting him get off. And slowly and methodically, the Lakers were slowly getting back into the game. They cut the lead down to 8 heading into the fourth quarter. And it was some instances where the Kings might hit some clutch shots down the stretch, but they also made some key mistakes because that Kings team, as talented as they were too tentative when it came down to big moments. And, they had key opportunities to finish off the Lakers, and, they didn't. And I don't like talking about, the refereeing had a lot to do with it. Listen, if you're a great team, great teams overcome bad officiating. And unfortunately, the Kings sometimes didn't have the focus or didn't have the precision to try to overcome those things. And pretty much the Lakers were almost there. They almost completed the comeback. And Vlade Divac was at the free throw line. You know what I mean? They were up by 98-97. And he made 1 out of 2 free throws to get him up a 2-point lead with 11 seconds to go. And I remember the play like it was yesterday. Kobe drove baseline against Doug Christie, missed the shot. Shaq was trying to get the putback in, but he put it up too quickly because he didn't want to go to the free throw line. If you watch the Shaq and Kobe interview, they pretty much reflect on that. But Shaq tried to get it up there very quickly, and then he tried to put it back up again. But Vlade slapped the ball away from Shaq, but he slapped it to an open Robert Horry, who was open at the top of the key, wide open and ready to launch. So he tapped the ball, and all of a sudden, it was a perfect bounce pass to Robert Horry, who was known for clutch shooting in the playoffs, a wide open three that went right down the net. Pandemonium in Staples Center. Pandemonium. And looking back on that, that was the one game that the Kings should have won, and they should have won, and they could have won if they would have not let their guard down. But that happened. The series was tied at 2 games apiece, and that shot pretty much saved their championship era. Flat out. If Robert Horry does not hit that game-winning shot, if that ball does not bounce into the hands of Horry, the Kings would go up 3-1, and they would have had a great chance of closing out that series. But it wasn't the case. So we moved to game 5, and once again, it was another back and forth affair. And then all of a sudden, Mike Bibby hits the game-winning shot with about 8 and 2/10 seconds remaining to pretty much give the Kings a 3-2 lead in the series. Then we reflect on game 6. This is the one that fans love to talk about to this day because of the amount of free throw shooting that the Lakers received in that fourth quarter. Because looking back at that game, listen, the Kings still had more left in the tank, and they should have won the game. But they were constantly getting thrashed on by the referees. I mean, in the second half, you look back at that stat line. Kobe Bryant and Kobe Bryant had 8 free throw attempts in that fourth quarter. Shaq had basically 14 of those free throw attempts. They pretty much attempted 27 free throw attempts in that fourth quarter, but the Kings still had a chance to win the game. Now, you remember at that game, too, where Kobe Bryant was being defended by Mike Bibby. Kobe accidentally hit Mike Bibby with an elbow up across the nose, and no foul was called. That moment right there signified how screwed up that game was. Now, I will never say that referees, can cost games because it's not always the case. But there's no doubt in my mind that the refereeing was very, very poor in that game. But as Ticket will tell you, great teams overcome bad officiating. And the Kings, didn't overcome the bad officiating and ended up losing that game. And then it goes down to a game 7. And that game 7 against those two teams is on YouTube. You can easily find it. But that game was a classic. I mean, both those teams were back and forth. Not one time that game went into a double-digit lead. The biggest lead of that game, what I think was up by 6 by the Kings heading into the halftime break until the Lakers pulled the lead within 2. And then after that, the Kings kept shooting themselves in the foot. When you look back at that game 7 for the Kings, think about this for a moment. They shot 16 of 30 from the free throw line. Okay, Vlade was shot 5 of 10. Hito Turkoglu shot 1 of 4. Chris Webber shot 2 of 4. Only Mike Bibby shot 6 of 8. So he was hitting a high percentage of his free throws. But they missed. They were basically shot 3 of 20 from, I should say, 2 of 20 from 3-point range. Okay, and pretty much the Lakers had to max out Shaquille O'Neal's minutes. Okay, but he made his free throws. He was basically 11 to 15 from the free throw line and grabbed 13 rebounds and scored 35 points. Kobe had to take 26 shots to get 30 points, but he made his critical shots when they needed them down the stretch. And only Mike Bibby was the only player on the floor. And he went through a stretch in that second half where he missed 7 straight, but he was hitting his buckets late in that fourth quarter to nearly pull the game out. But the thing that I remembered from that game was the Kings, the rest of the Kings, with the exception of Mike Bibby, they were too tentative. They were scared of the moment. They were not shooting the ball with confidence. They were making terrible decisions with their passing, and it pretty much was the difference because if one of them was hitting their shots with Mike Bibby, I think they would have pulled off the big, victory against the Lakers. But it wasn't meant to be because the Lakers outscored the Kings 12-6 in that overtime to beat them in Game 7 on the road in Arco Arena. All right. And when that game was over, man, I just thought to myself, my goodness, what a game that was. What a game that was. And it took every bit of energy and took every bit of blood, sweat, and tears from that Lakers team to overpass that Kings team. Because if the Kings would have beaten the Lakers, they went on to win the title because nobody was going to lose to the Nets that year. With no disrespect to the Nets of that year, they weren't as better than the Kings or the Lakers. I'm just saying to be in all honesty. But that game was a monumental moment because the Lakers went on to win their 3rd straight championship. The Kings went on to pretty much end their season in a very heartbreaking loss. They had a chance to get back to the conference finals until Chris Webber tore his knee up, in that conference semifinals against the Dallas Mavericks. And that pretty much ended the Kings' ride. And they never reached beyond the conference finals again. The last time they were at a Game 7 was back in 2004, my hometown with the Timberwolves, and when KG's birthday, when he had the 32 points and 21 rebounds in that Game 7. So that 0-2 Game 7 was their best chance to win a championship. And unfortunately, as talented they were, they didn't have the grit. They weren't ready for the big stage, and it cost them. And so, you look back at that series, it was pretty much a hard-fought series to the bitter end. And it was probably one of the greatest series of that three-peat era. And it took every bit of energy from Shaq and Kobe to pull off that series. I'm serious. When you look back at that series, it was controversial, yes, but you cannot deny that it was probably one of the top 10 greatest series of that decade. Bar none. And pretty much everybody left everything on that floor. And I remember that like it was yesterday. It was just a beautiful series to watch. It was probably one of the best series I've ever seen. It was just basketball at its finest. You don't get that in today's basketball. And so I just wanted to make this video very, 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 very clear about how I love that series and how you should rewatch it again, because I still rewatch it sometimes, and I still I still can't believe how competitive that was. And if the Kings beat the Lakers, they probably would have won another championship the next year. But you know, there's always a lot of possibilities. But that's just my 2 cents about that whole series. But if you're a young viewer that have not ever seen that series before, do yourself a favor. Watch that series from game 1 to game 7, and you'll be in for a very, very special treat of great basketball between two of those best teams during that 01-02 season. But tell me what you guys think in the comment section. Let me know what your memories of that 2002 Western Conference Finals. And I'll see y'all tonight.